Without further ado, Professor, shh, quiet you. I'm going to introduce the genius of the Futurama pilot. What genius?
Futurama is an incredibly underrated show with an extremely well-written pilot. A pilot where all of the characters and their planned arcs are carefully set up while still remaining funny and adhering to the show's typical future formula. Futurama frequently gets overlooked by being creator Matt Groening's middle child, but I don't think that's fair at all. Don't get me wrong, the show is definitely critically acclaimed, but you can tell just by looking at this Google Trends data that it's a much less popular show than its predecessor. Of course, The Simpsons is still airing for some reason, and I guess you could say that skews the data a bit, but in a way it also doesn't, because after all, Futurama was canceled 2 separate times. This isn't me saying The Simpsons was bad by any means. I love that show too. This is just me saying that Futurama is at minimum on par with the golden years of The Simpsons. Futurama is a show that took 4 years of development to get off the ground, and it's also a show where each episode takes about a year to get from the idea stage to its completion. It's also incredibly smart for what it is. The writer's room was full of scientists and physicists, so a lot of the things the show explores are things you could look up for yourself and dive pretty deep into. Of course, it's still sci-fi, but nice touches like that are what make this show so special. In this video, I'm going to break down the Futurama pilot for people who aren't necessarily writers and explain why it works so well on a basic level. But don't worry, if you happen to already know the basics, there's still going to be some stuff in here for you too, so stick around. And then subscribe for more videos like this in the future. Oh shit, dog! The first thing we should cover is what exactly a pilot has to do for your show. It has to introduce the characters, hint at their future arcs, set up the world of story, and usually put the intended format on display. All while still telling an interesting story in hopes that you come back to watch again next week. That's hard enough to do for an hour-long show like Breaking Bad or Better Call Saul, but Futurama has to do that in just 22 minutes. That's insane. And with that, let me give you a few key character traits to keep in mind as we go along, so you can start to make your own connections. Fry, voiced by Billy West, is incredibly dumb and clumsy, but usually successful in his efforts despite those shortcomings. Leela, voiced by Katie Sagal, is confident and intelligent, but usually manages to mess things up in some way or another. And Bender, voiced by John DiMaggio, is somehow the most human in the group, despite being a bending unit style robot with a shiny metal ass. Now, let's get into the show's framework and typical structure as exemplified through the pilot itself. Sitcoms generally follow the typical 3-act structure that you see in most media, except with a cold open on top and a tag at the end. For simplicity's sake, you can basically refer to these as an intro and an outro to the plot of the episode. This is something Futurama does use, but they also tend to go a little further and occasionally incorporate a heavily modified version of the hero's journey along the way. This is a structure you see very frequently and likely already know subconsciously. Harry Potter uses it, Star Wars uses it, The Matrix uses it, Spider-Man uses it, and of course, The Lord of the Rings uses it. So let's go through the episode step by step and point out how parts of the plot align with this well-known structure. And then when we're finished, maybe you can think about how your favorite movies and TV shows might incorporate this as well. The episode begins with Fry playing a side-scrolling space shooter on an arcade cabinet in the pizza place he works at. Some obvious foreshadowing here. After that, we are immediately exposed to his ordinary world, which is the first step in the hero's journey.
You stink, loser!
Hey, Fry, pizza going out.
Come on!
Fry hates his life. He's underpaid and underappreciated. He has a girlfriend that cheats on him, people that steal from him, kids that make fun of him, and an onslaught of prank calls that send him to random locations around the city, even on New Year's Eve. This section of the story is to set him up as a sympathetic character as he's running into the same issues that the majority of the working class does. It's pretty easy to understand his plight. This is when the call to adventure comes in, stage 2 of the hero's journey. Fry gets sent to a cryogenics lab to deliver a pizza to one
icy wiener. Oh, crud.
Fry settles into the prank and decides to enjoy the order for himself, celebrating the end to another lousy millennium. However, when the clock strikes midnight, he loses his balance on a teetering chair and falls backwards into one of the open cryo tanks, the timer automatically setting itself to release him in 1,000 years. Fry wakes up from his hibernation after a quick sight gag showing what happened while he was frozen, and he's immediately excited by the prospect of a fresh start.
It's the future. My parents, my coworkers, my girlfriend. I'll never see any of them again. Yahoo!
This is the end of the cold open, and a perfect example of Fry's feelings towards his former life, but he's still not exactly ready for what's in store for him yet. He quickly gets whisked away into Leela's office, who is a cryogenics counselor, where he's supposed to have a job assigned to him in this strange new world.
Can I ask you a question?
As long as it's not about my eye. Is it about my eye?
Sort of.
Just ask the question.
What's with the eye?
They go back and forth a bit here, and Fry is then given all of the exposition he needs in a very clean and comedic way.
Wait a minute. Is that blimp accurate?
Yep, it's December 31st, 2999.
My God, 1,000,000 years.
When they finally get down to brass tacks, Fry finds out that, much to his dismay, he's still destined to be a delivery boy, even in the year 3000.
What if I refuse?
Then you'll be fired.
Fine.
Out of a cannon into the sun.
Even the potential consequences of his refusal aren't enough to make Fry cave, and he quickly attempts to make his escape. During the ensuing chaos, Fry accidentally knocks Leela into one of the cryo tanks, but he changes the timer to let her out in just 5 minutes. This gives him a head start, but also, structurally, sets him up to be a morally good character. From here, we take a slight detour from the hero's journey talk, as Fry sets up the world of story for the series as he explores his new surroundings. Radio City Music Hall has become Radio City Mutant Hall. There's flying cars peppering the skies. The subway system has been replaced by a series of tubes. And now there's a suicide booth on just about every corner. We continue to learn things as the episode goes on, but this is the most obvious section of it, as Fry is learning about things with no distractions at the same time as the audience. Let's jump back into the episode's formula, because it's time for Fry to meet his mentor, aka Bender. Or Bender Bending Rodriguez, if you want to be formal. This introduction begins the setup for both of these characters and incorporates things I told you to remember in the previous section. Fry is naive enough to accidentally go into a suicide booth, but still has the wherewithal to clumsily save himself and his new robot friend from certain death. While Bender, on the other hand, was literally about to end his own life after finding out the steel beams he was bending at work were used to make the very same suicide booths that he was now attempting to use. A very human kind of moral crisis. This is the first time the show modifies the hero's journey, because technically now it's time for step 5, crossing the threshold, but Fry already did that back when he decided to escape and explore the city on his own. I mention this because it shows these aren't hard and fast rules. There's room for structure manipulation in any story. This is a good time to point out that the show now jumps back to Leela's perspective, to introduce the audience to the fact that this show isn't solely going to be about Fry. It's going to be a show with several different plot lines that tend to intertwine with each other. I know I'm kind of hanging things up here, but I'd also like to mention the perfect pacing of this episode, because we're coming up on step 6 of 12 in the hero's journey, and we're exactly halfway into the episode's runtime. That's nuts. With Leela now in hot pursuit of Fry and Bender, Fry is confronted with a series of challenges to escape the clutches of a dead-end job. First, Leela discovers the pair hiding out in a bar. Then, she pursues them on foot into the Head Museum, which is a museum occupied mostly by former celebrities and historical figures being kept alive like fish in tanks without their bodies. This segment does a lot of things. It sets up the beginning of Fry and Bender's relationship. It sets up how the show's going to manage to pull off pop culture references despite taking place in the future. And it sets up Leela's future face turn when she decides to stand up against the use of excessive force.
You guys were totally out of control.
That's our job. We're peace officers.
Oh, and also the fact that she knows karate. During their escape, Fry and Bender also set up an arc that I've been hinting at, which is Bender battling against his programming and the nature of what that means for him, which, as we know, eventually leads to him becoming the most human character in the entire cast.
If someone programmed you to jump off a bridge, would you do it?
I'll have to check my program. Yep.
Open up!
Come on, Bender. It's up to you to make your own decisions in life.
You're full of crap, Fry. You make a persuasive argument, Fry. I'm unstoppable!
I don't know how you did that.
So Fry and Bender manage to escape into the sewers despite Leela's attempts to stop them, and they discover the ruins of Old New York, aka Part 7 of the hero's journey, the approach to the innermost cave. In this section of the journey, our hero must face an inner conflict which, up until this point, he hasn't been confronted with directly. For Fry, this is realizing exactly what losing everyone he has ever known truly means for him. The novelty of the future has worn off, and he's starting to miss his family. As this happens, Part 8 of the journey arrives. The ordeal. This is the moment where Leela fully cements herself as an ally, opening up about the fact that she's lonely too, giving her own dramatic backstory about being the only one-eyed orphaned alien on the entire planet. Still reeling from his realization of loss, Fry gives in to Leela's demands and says he'll become a delivery boy if she really thinks that's what's best. This sort of reads like Fry's giving up, but it's actually what ends up winning him the battle, which is a very stereotypically Fry thing to have happen. Leela removes her own career chip in response, and the duo now becomes a trio, just in time for Bender to ruin the tender moment by stealing her jewelry and then drinking. I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. Part 9 and 10 of the journey kind of run together a bit in this episode, so just to cover them quickly, the reward is the prospect of mooching off Fry's very old nephew, Professor Hubert J. Farnsworth, and the road back is going to meet him. This is the moment in the story where all seems well. The professor is happy to see them, and he's most definitely someone they could take advantage of, as the writers waste no time in setting up his strange and aloof attitude.
This is my work stool, and over there is my intergalactic spaceship. And here's where I keep assorted lengths of wire.
However, now it's time for the police to show up and give everyone one final test.
Attention job deserters. Come out with your hands up. We have you partially surrounded.
No!
Part 11 of the journey is the resurrection, or the most dangerous encounter with death. In this case, it's when the crew boards the Planet Express ship and tries to outrun the police by escaping into space. In this scene, Leela both cements herself as the ship's captain and removes the jacket she's been wearing, giving a pretty strong visual cue that she is no longer the bad guy we met her as, and she has become a good guy. From here, the crew rockets off into the night sky, which is lit up by hundreds of fireworks from the New Year's celebration below. They're taking heavy fire, but they manage to make it out of the planet's atmosphere by the skin of their teeth, and Fry is absolutely loving it. Oh, and by the way, my New Year's tradition for the last 2 years running has been syncing up midnight with when Fry says blast off, so maybe give that a try. That brings us to the 12th and final part of the hero's journey. Our protagonists briefly celebrate their escape, but Leela is quick to point out the fact that they are now all fugitives from the law. However, the professor says that's not going to be a problem. He conveniently needs a new crew for his ship, and he just so happens to have all of the proper career chips to make that happen. It's revealed that the professor runs a small package delivery company in order to fund his research, and this is when Fry makes a shocking realization.
So I'm gonna be a delivery boy?
Exactly. All right! I'm a delivery boy!
So after that entire journey, Fry just ends up being a delivery boy with extra steps, but he's happy now? Why? It's because he's excited to feel like he finally belongs. He's quite literally on a spaceship with a brand new set of friends that all just risk their lives for him. He subconsciously likes the future because it's not that much different from the past. Realistically, only his key problems seem to have changed. There's a ton of new scenery, and he now has a family that actually seems to care about him. Those key differences end up being enough to give him a sense of excitement and wonder, despite the fact that he's definitely still a loser, and he's still just a delivery boy. Fry is stupid, but he knows what he wants. Friends. As if all that structure gold wasn't enough, Futurama takes things one step further, because that's just the kind of show it is. What if I told you there was a secret hint to an arc that wouldn't take place until deep into the 3rd and 4th seasons in the footage that I've already shown you? Well, way back when Fry was about to be frozen, you may have noticed this rather alien-looking shadow in the corner of the frame. For fans of the show, that's quite obviously Nibbler's shadow, but for the one or two of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, Nibbler is Leela's pet, who she picks up on an adventure in the 4th episode of the 1st season. So what's Leela's pet doing 1,000 years in the past? Hear me out. Near the end of season 3, in The Day the Earth Stood Stupid, Nibbler is actually revealed to be Lord Nibbler, a leader amongst a super intelligent alien species that has existed since the beginning of time. This race, known as the Niblonians, have a rival known only as the Brain Spawn, which is a swarm of giant brains that navigate the galaxy, wiping out planets and their populations. They do this by using their telekinesis to make them all stupid. Now I know what you're thinking. That still doesn't answer my question. Why was Nibbler in the past? Well, that's because Fry is immune to the Brain Spawn's powers, all thanks to traveling back in time and accidentally becoming his own grandpa. Yeah, that's a story for another day. The point is, the survival of all life in the universe was dependent on Fry and his Scooty Puff Jr., and I am well aware how insane this must all sound. Everything that I just mentioned leads back to the fact that Nibbler is thousands of years old, made the Icy Wiener prank call in 1999, and then tipped over Fry's chair to ensure he made it into the cryo tank. This kind of attention to detail and future planning is almost unheard of in television. I mean, Community sorta did it with their Beetlejuice sight gag, but not with a main plot point. Some of the only shows that I can think of that do this off the top of my limited knowledge-having head are the previously mentioned hour-long dramas like Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. While on the topic of Easter eggs, because, well, I'm not quite done gushing yet, this alien language that appears in the background of the show? Yeah, it's a real language. You can decipher it, because of course you can. It's referred to as Alienese, and there's actually 2 versions of it. The first was a simple cipher, but the fans figured it out too quickly, so they went back and made a more difficult to unravel one later on. That means there's plenty of messages for you to go back and try and decode. This series was just incredibly influential. I mean, come on! A quirky workplace comedy with an underlying romance? Sound familiar? Futurama is a show that means a lot to me. It often takes a back seat in people's minds when held up next to The Simpsons, but that's not fair at all. I first noticed this attitude toward the show as far back as 2002. I have a very distinct memory of the pilot coming on in my basement when I was hanging out with a group of friends. I remember immediately loving it, despite still only being a dumb little 8-year-old at the time, but my friends didn't feel the same. They were a lot less enthusiastic, which I didn't like. This was kind of my first taste of enjoying something that wasn't immediately popular, which would definitely become a common theme in my media consumption in the future. It would take 4 more years after that fateful night to finally connect with someone on the show, and they're still someone I'd like to call one of my best friends to this day. It's corny as hell, but that was kind of a relief for me, because much like Fry, I finally felt like I belonged somewhere, and I realized that I would always be able to find like-minded people as long as I looked for them. I know that's probably a cringy story and not even close to deep, especially considering the fact that Futurama was for sure a critically acclaimed show and for sure mainstream, but not everything has to be poignant or obscure. Anyway, that's it. Give me a like, give me a comment, and maybe subscribe, and I'll post another video for you next week. If you can't wait that long, why not watch that one in the meantime? Bye-bye!